The autumn afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Meridian Cafe, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors as I settled into my usual corner booth with a steaming cup of lavender Earl Grey. After spending 8 hours cataloging rare manuscripts at the Metropolitan Library, this quiet refuge in Lower Manhattan had become my Friday ritual. The cafe buzzed with the gentle murmur of conversations, clinking porcelain, and the soft jazz that always made me feel like I belonged somewhere in this sprawling city. At 26, I'd grown comfortable with solitude, finding peace in small moments between the chaos of urban life. My name is Ruby Callahan, and books had been my companions long before people learned to appreciate my company. When my parents died in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving me responsible for my younger sister Emma's college tuition, I discovered that fictional worlds offered more stability than reality ever could. I was recording a voice message for Emma, updating her about the scholarship application we'd submitted last week, when 2 men entered the cafe with the kind of presence that makes conversations pause mid-sentence. The first commanded attention without effort. Tall, impeccably dressed in what appeared to be a custom Italian suit, with sharp green eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings before settling on his intended destination. His companion was younger, sharing similar dark features, but lacking the older man's controlled intensity. Where the first moved with calculated grace, the second carried himself with barely contained energy, like someone constantly proving himself worthy of being there. They approached a table near the back corner, where a nervous-looking man in his 50s waited, perspiration visible on his forehead, despite the cafe's comfortable temperature. Something about their dynamic made my journalist instincts, dormant since college, flicker with curiosity. "Judge Morrison has agreed to the terms," the nervous man said, his voice carrying further than he probably intended. "The construction contracts will be approved Monday morning, and the environmental impact reports will reflect favorable findings." I should have looked away, minded my own business, continued recording my innocent message to Emma about scholarship deadlines and weekend plans. Instead, I found myself leaning slightly forward, my phone still recording as the well-dressed man responded in a voice like expensive whiskey. "And the Federal Oversight Committee? Senator Williams has ensured their investigation will focus on projects in other districts. Your investments in the waterfront development are completely protected, Alessandro." The name carried weight that made my chest tighten with recognition I couldn't quite place. Alessandro. I'd heard it whispered in certain circles, mentioned in newspaper articles about business acquisitions and charitable donations that seemed too generous, too perfectly timed. "The Witness Protection Program for Agent Martinez needs to be addressed," Alessandro continued, his tone never changing from conversational. "She's scheduled to testify next month about the pension fund transfers. That testimony cannot happen." My blood ran cold as the implications sank in. This wasn't just business corruption. They were discussing eliminating someone whose only crime was telling the truth. My phone continued recording, capturing every word of their careful planning, every detail of what sounded like conspiracy, reaching the highest levels of city government. "Victor will handle the Martinez situation," Alessandro said, glancing toward his younger companion. "Clean, untraceable, before she reaches the courthouse." The younger man, Victor, nodded with enthusiasm that made my stomach turn. "It'll look like an accident. Car trouble on the highway. Maybe a gas leak in her safe house." I pressed the phone closer to my chest, hoping to muffle any sound it might make while my heart hammered against my ribs. These men were casually discussing murder, as if it were a business expense, planning to eliminate someone whose only protection was a federal program that clearly wasn't secure enough. "The construction contracts alone will generate $40 million in the first quarter," the nervous politician continued. "Your percentage, as agreed, will be transferred through the usual Caribbean accounts. And if anyone asks questions about the bidding process?" The other contractors had unfortunate permit issues, nothing that can't be explained by bureaucratic incompetence. I wanted to stop listening, to delete whatever my phone had captured and pretend this conversation had never happened. But Emma's face flashed in my mind. Bright, hopeful, trusting me to navigate a world that suddenly felt infinitely more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. The recording app on my phone showed 12 minutes of audio when movement caught my peripheral vision. Victor was looking directly at me, his dark eyes narrowing as he noticed my obvious attention to their conversation. "We have a problem," he said quietly, cutting off the politician mid-sentence. All three men turned toward my booth, and I felt the weight of Alessandro's gaze like physical pressure. Up close, his face was even more striking. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from granite, and eyes that seemed to see everything I'd tried to hide. "The redhead in the corner," Victor continued, his voice low but carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet cafe. "She's been listening to everything, and I'm pretty sure she's recording." Alessandro's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around our section of the cafe. Other patrons seemed to sense it too, gathering their belongings and leaving with the instinctive speed of prey animals detecting predators. "Miss," Alessandro called, his voice pleasant but carrying unmistakable authority. "Would you mind joining us for a moment?" It wasn't really a question, and we all knew it. My hands trembled as I ended the recording and slipped my phone into my purse, trying to appear casual while my nervous system screamed warnings about the danger I'd stumbled into. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," I managed, standing on unsteady legs. "I was just recording a message for my sister about college applications." Victor's laugh held no humor. 12 minutes about college applications? That's quite a detailed message. As I approached their table, Alessandro gestured to an empty chair with the kind of politeness that somehow felt more threatening than open hostility. This close, I could see the subtle scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the expensive rings on his fingers, and the way he positioned himself to maintain visual contact with both me and the cafe's entrance. "Ruby Callahan," he said, and my blood turned to ice water. He knew my name. 26 years old, librarian at the Metropolitan Library, guardian to your sister Emma, who's currently attending Columbia on partial scholarship. The casual recitation of my personal information felt like having my privacy surgically removed without anesthesia. How did he know these things? How long had he been aware of my existence? "Please, sit down," Alessandro continued, his tone never losing its deceptive gentleness. "We need to discuss what you think you heard just now." The elevator in Alessandro's building moved with silent efficiency, carrying me toward what I suspected might be my last conversation as a free woman. Victor stood beside me, his presence radiating barely controlled aggression, while two other men in expensive suits flanked us like bookends of expensive menace. The building itself spoke of wealth that existed in different stratospheres from my modest library salary. Marble floors, crystal fixtures, and artwork that probably cost more than my annual rent. Alessandro's private office occupied the entire top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Manhattan's skyline. The space was decorated with understated luxury. Leather furniture that looked both comfortable and intimidating, shelves lined with first-edition books, and a massive mahogany desk that seemed designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. "Please, have a seat," Alessandro said, gesturing toward a chair positioned directly across from his desk. His tone remained pleasant, almost conversational, but I could feel the weight of his attention like physical pressure. "Would you care for something to drink? Coffee, water, perhaps something stronger?" "I'm fine, thank you," I managed, though my throat felt like sandpaper. The politeness of the situation somehow made it more terrifying than outright threats would have been. Alessandro settled behind his desk, studying me with those sharp green eyes that seemed to catalog every micro-expression, every nervous gesture I tried to suppress. "Let's discuss what happened at the cafe, Miss Callahan. I'm curious about your perspective on our conversation." "I wasn't really paying attention," I said, the lie feeling clumsy on my tongue. "I was focused on recording a message for my sister about her scholarship applications." Victor snorted from his position near the window. 12 minutes about scholarships? Come on, Alessandro, she's obviously lying. "Patience, Victor," Alessandro said, without taking his eyes off me. "Miss Callahan is intelligent enough to understand the delicate nature of her situation. Aren't you, Ruby?" The use of my first name sent chills down my spine. This man had investigated me, knew details about my life that I'd never shared with anyone. How long had he been aware of my existence? What else did he know about Emma? About our struggles? About the private fears that kept me awake at night? "I heard some men discussing business," I admitted. deciding that complete denial was useless against someone with his resources. Something about construction contracts and political connections. I didn't understand most of it. "But you were recording," Alessandro observed, leaning back in his chair. "That suggests more than casual disinterest." My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized the inevitable trap closing around me. "I was already recording when you started talking. I didn't mean to capture your conversation." "Show me your phone," he said, extending his hand with calm authority. Every instinct screamed against compliance. But what choice did I have? I retrieved my phone from my purse with trembling fingers, navigating to the voice memo app. The recording was there. 12 minutes and 37 seconds of incriminating conversation that could destroy powerful people and put me in immediate danger. Alessandro accepted the phone and pressed play, listening to his own voice discussing corruption, murder, and conspiracy with the same expression he might wear while reviewing quarterly financial reports. When Agent Martinez's name came up, when Victor discussed making her death look accidental, I watched Alessandro's face for any sign of remorse or second thoughts. There was none. "You recorded quite a detailed conversation," he said when the audio ended. "Information that could be very valuable to certain people, very dangerous to others. I don't want to be involved in any of this," I said quickly. "I just want to delete the recording and pretend this never happened." "Unfortunately, Miss Callahan, knowledge doesn't work that way. Once you've heard certain things, once you possess certain information, neutrality becomes impossible." Victor moved closer to the desk, his impatience obvious. "Alessandro, we're wasting time." She heard everything. Names, plans, specific details about Martinez. "We can't just let her walk away." "No," Alessandro agreed. "We can't. But Miss Callahan seems like a reasonable person. Someone who understands that cooperation is more beneficial than resistance." The word cooperation hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I didn't want to explore. I thought about Emma, about her dreams of becoming a doctor, about the scholarship applications and student loans and all the normal problems that seemed laughably insignificant compared to my current situation. "What kind of cooperation?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the terror coursing through my system. Alessandro smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "I'm going to offer you a position, Miss Callahan. Consider it a consulting arrangement. $50,000 annually, deposited monthly into an account we'll establish for you. In exchange, you provide me with that recording, and agree never to discuss what you heard with anyone." The figure was more than I made at the library, enough to cover Emma's remaining tuition and eliminate the financial stress that had plagued us for years. But accepting money from Alessandro Toretti would make me complicit in whatever darkness he represented. "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Then you become a liability," Alessandro said simply, "and I don't allow liabilities to threaten my family's security." The threat was delivered with the same pleasant tone he'd used to offer me a drink, making it somehow more chilling than Victor's obvious aggression. This was a man who could order someone's death between courses at dinner, who could destroy lives with casual efficiency. "I need the recording deleted immediately," Alessandro continued, "and your word that you'll never attempt to contact law enforcement about what you heard. In return, you'll receive financial security and my personal guarantee that no harm will come to you or your sister." 2 weeks passed in a strange suspended animation. The $50,000 appeared in a new bank account exactly as Alessandro had promised, accompanied by documentation establishing me as a cultural consultant for Toretti Enterprises. The money solved problems I'd struggled with for years: Emma's tuition, our modest rent, the constant anxiety about unexpected expenses that had defined my adult life. But peace of mind proved more elusive. I was cataloging medieval manuscripts on a Tuesday afternoon when she approached my desk. A blonde woman in her mid-30s, wearing a tailored suit that suggested federal employment rather than academic research. "Ruby Callahan?" she asked, flashing credentials that made my blood run cold. "Detective Sarah Reynolds, FBI Financial Crimes Division." I was hoping we could have a conversation. The library's quiet atmosphere suddenly felt oppressive, every patron a potential witness to whatever confrontation was about to unfold. Detective Reynolds settled into the chair across from my desk, her sharp blue eyes studying me with the same calculating intensity I'd grown accustomed to from Alessandro. "I've been investigating certain financial irregularities in your account," she began, spreading papers across my desk like a poker hand. "Significant deposits that don't match your employment income, established through shell companies with interesting ownership structures." My mouth went dry as I recognized the implications. Somehow, the FBI had connected me to Alessandro's organization, identified the consulting payments as suspicious, and now I was caught between law enforcement and criminal enterprise with no safe options. "I do freelance consulting work," I said carefully. "Cultural research for private clients. Cultural consulting that pays $50,000 annually?" Detective Reynolds' smile was sharp as winter wind. "Miss Callahan, I think we both know that's not entirely accurate. The question is whether you're going to help me build a case against Alessandro Toretti, or whether you're going to become part of that case as a defendant." The next month passed like walking a tightrope over an abyss, with federal investigators on one side and Alessandro's organization on the other. Detective Reynolds had made her expectations crystal clear: cooperate fully or face conspiracy charges that could destroy any hope of a normal future. Meanwhile, Alessandro's monthly payments continued arriving with clockwork precision, each deposit a reminder of the dangerous bargain I'd struck. I found myself studying Alessandro during our increasingly frequent meetings, searching for signs of the monster Detective Reynolds insisted he was. What I discovered instead was a man far more complex than I'd expected. During a community outreach event his organization sponsored, I watched him personally ensure that elderly residents in Little Italy received proper heating repairs before winter. He remembered names, asked about grandchildren, spoke fluent Italian with immigrants who seemed genuinely grateful for his attention. "You seem surprised," he observed as we walked through the neighborhood afterward. "Did you expect horns and a pitchfork?" "I expected someone less." I struggled for the right word, then settled on honesty. "Less human." Alessandro's laugh held genuine amusement, rather than the sharp edge that characterized most of his expressions. "Humanity is complicated, Miss Callahan. People aren't simply good or evil, despite what law enforcement would have you believe. But what about Agent Martinez?" The question escaped before I could stop myself, surprising both of us with my directness. "How do you justify planning someone's murder?" His expression hardened slightly, but he didn't deflect or deny. "Agent Martinez chose to betray people who trusted her. That choice has consequences. So does following orders without questioning them," I replied, shocked by my own boldness. "At what point does loyalty become complicity?" Alessandro stopped walking and turned to study me with those penetrating green eyes. "You're either very brave or very foolish to challenge me so directly." "Maybe both," I admitted. "But if I'm going to work for you, shouldn't I understand what that means?" Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or intrigue. Most people in your position would simply take the money and avoid asking difficult questions. "I'm not most people." "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Victor and Elena, both wearing expressions that suggested they'd been discussing me before joining us. Victor's hostility had become increasingly obvious over the past weeks, while Elena's careful politeness felt like a blade wrapped in silk. "Alessandro," Victor said without preamble, "we need to discuss the Callahan situation. She's becoming a liability we can't afford." "Ruby has proven her discretion," Alessandro replied, his tone carrying warning. "She's caused no problems." "She's caused nothing but problems," Victor countered. "First the recording, then the FBI investigation. How long before she decides cooperation with law enforcement is more appealing than our arrangement?" Elena stepped forward with calculated grace. "There have been some concerning developments, Alessandro. Financial records show Detective Reynolds has been monitoring Miss Callahan's accounts very closely. It's possible she's already been compromised." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "That's not true. I haven't told the FBI anything." But they're pressuring you," Elena continued smoothly. "It's only natural that someone in your position would eventually choose self-preservation over loyalty to people she barely knows." "I've kept my word," I said, looking directly at Alessandro. "I deleted the recording. I haven't contacted law enforcement, and I won't. But I can't control what Detective Reynolds chooses to investigate. Victor's impatience was palpable. Alessandro, you're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. She should have been eliminated weeks ago. That's enough, Alessandro said sharply, and something in his voice made both Victor and Elena step back. Ruby is under my protection. Anyone who forgets that will answer to me personally. The declaration sent warmth through my chest that I tried desperately to ignore. This wasn't gratitude for his protection. It was something more dangerous, more complicated. I was developing feelings for a man whose world operated by rules that could get me killed. Later that evening, Detective Reynolds cornered me outside my apartment building, her patience clearly exhausted. "Time's running out, Ruby," she said without preamble. "We know about the community center donations, the scholarship funds, all the legitimate businesses Toretti uses to launder money. But we need evidence of the illegal activities, the contract fixing, the political corruption, the elimination of witnesses. I don't have access to that information," I protested. "I'm just a consultant." "Then get access," Reynolds snapped. "Because right now, you look like a willing participant in criminal conspiracy. Your bank records show regular payments from shell companies linked to organized crime. Without cooperation, I can't protect you from prosecution." The threat was clear. Cooperate, or become a defendant. But cooperation meant betraying Alessandro, and despite everything logical screaming warnings about my situation, I found myself reluctant to destroy someone who'd shown me unexpected kindness and protection. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Get close to him. Document meetings, record conversations, photograph documents. Give us what we need to build a case that will stand up in federal court. And if he discovers what I'm doing?" Reynolds' expression softened slightly. "Ruby, this man has ordered the deaths of at least 6 people in the past 2 years. Witnesses, competitors, anyone who threatens his operations. You think his feelings for you will protect you if he learns you're working with us?" The word feelings hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to examine. Did Alessandro have feelings for me? Did I have feelings for him? And if both were true, how did that change everything about my impossible situation? "I need more time," I said finally. "You have 1 week," Reynolds replied. "After that, we proceed with or without your cooperation. And trust me, Ruby, you don't want to be on the wrong side of this investigation when it concludes." That night, alone in my apartment, I stared at my phone and wondered if I was strong enough to make the choice that would determine not just my future, but possibly my life. Alessandro had protected me from his own organization, shown me glimpses of the man beneath the dangerous exterior. But Detective Reynolds was right about one thing. His world was built on violence, and sentiment rarely trumped survival in that environment. The next morning brought a text from Alessandro. "Dinner tonight. We need to discuss your ongoing security." Even his formal messages carried authority that made my pulse quicken with anticipation I couldn't afford to feel. I was falling for a man who could order my death as easily as he'd order wine, and Detective Reynolds was demanding I betray him to save myself. The tightrope was getting thinner, and the fall would be fatal no matter which side I landed on. Alessandro's penthouse apartment reflected the same understated luxury as his office, but with personal touches that revealed glimpses of the man behind the dangerous reputation. Original artwork adorned walls painted in warm earth tones, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of Central Park. The dining room table had been set for 2 with crystal stemware and china that probably cost more than my monthly salary. 2 months had passed since that first terrifying encounter at the cafe, and Detective Reynolds had grown increasingly frustrated with my lack of cooperation. Yesterday, she'd cornered me again outside the library, demanding evidence, recordings, anything that could advance her investigation. For the first time, I'd found the courage to refuse outright. "I'm not working with you," I'd told her, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "I want nothing to do with your investigation." Reynolds had stared at me with something approaching pity. "You're making a mistake, Ruby. One that could cost you everything." But as I stood in Alessandro's elegant dining room, watching him pour wine that probably cost more than my weekly groceries, I wasn't sure anymore what constituted a mistake. The man before me bore little resemblance to the monster Detective Reynolds described in her briefings. "You seem thoughtful tonight," Alessandro observed. handing me a glass of deep red wine that tasted like liquid silk. Is everything all right with Emma's studies? The casual mention of my sister should have felt threatening, but instead it demonstrated the genuine interest he'd taken in my life. He remembered details I'd mentioned weeks ago, asked follow-up questions about her pre-med courses, even arranged for her to receive an anonymous scholarship that had eliminated her remaining financial stress. She's doing well. Thank you for asking. The organic chemistry course was challenging, but she managed an A-. Intelligence runs in the family, he said with a smile that reached his eyes. She's fortunate to have someone who cares so deeply about her future. During the first course, a perfectly prepared seafood risotto, our conversation flowed with surprising ease. Alessandro possessed knowledge about literature, art, and history that went far beyond what I'd expected from someone in his position. He discussed Renaissance poetry with genuine passion, quoted Dante with perfect pronunciation, and asked insightful questions about my work with medieval manuscripts. You're not what I expected when I first heard about Alessandro Toretti, I admitted as the main course arrived. What did you expect? He asked, cutting into what appeared to be perfectly prepared beef tenderloin. Someone less educated, I searched for the right word. Less human. Alessandro's expression grew serious. My father believed that power without culture was just brutality. He insisted I understand art, literature, philosophy, the things that separate civilization from chaos. Your father sounds like a complicated man. He was. Alessandro set down his fork, studying the wine in his glass as if it held answers to questions he'd never voiced. I was 24 when he died. Heart attack during a business meeting. One moment he was negotiating a construction contract. The next he was gone. The pain in his voice was genuine, unguarded in a way that revealed depth to his character I hadn't expected. That must have been devastating. It was. But grief is a luxury men in my position can't afford for long. The organization needed leadership, and I was the only heir. Victor was too young, too unpredictable, so I stepped into responsibilities I'd never wanted, made decisions that would have horrified the literature professor I'd planned to become. You wanted to teach? Alessandro's smile held bitter irony. Columbia offered me a position in their Italian studies department. I was supposed to start the semester after my father died. Instead, I inherited an empire built on violence and learned to speak the language of power instead of poetry. The revelation transformed my understanding of the man sitting across from me. This wasn't someone who'd chosen criminal enterprise. It was someone who'd sacrificed personal dreams for family obligation, who'd been shaped by circumstances beyond his control. What about you? He asked. Emma mentioned that you'd wanted to be a journalist before your parents' accident. The casual mention that he'd spoken with my sister should have alarmed me, but somehow it felt natural. Of course he would want to understand my background, my motivations. Investigative journalism, I confirmed. I had dreams of exposing corruption, holding powerful people accountable for their actions. The irony isn't lost on me, Alessandro said quietly. Here you are, sitting across from exactly the kind of person you once hoped to investigate. Here I am, I agreed, meeting his gaze directly, and discovering that reality is more complicated than I thought. We talked until nearly midnight, sharing stories about loss, responsibility, and the weight of caring for family when the world seemed determined to make that impossible. Alessandro spoke about the pressure of maintaining peace between rival factions, the constant threat of law enforcement, the isolation that came with power everyone feared, but few understood. I found myself describing the crushing anxiety of those first months after my parents' death, when Emma's future hung in the balance, and every financial decision felt like life or death. The relief when the scholarship money appeared, the guilt of accepting help I couldn't repay, the constant fear that one mistake would destroy everything I'd worked to build. You're stronger than you realize, Alessandro said as the evening wound down. Most people would have crumbled under that kind of pressure. Most people don't have a choice. There's always a choice, Ruby. The question is whether you're brave enough to make the difficult one. As his driver prepared to take me home, Alessandro walked me to the elevator, his presence making the familiar gesture feel intimate rather than polite. Thank you for dinner, I said, and for listening. Thank you for trusting me with your story. He stepped closer, not threateningly, but enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made my pulse quicken. Ruby. The use of my first name, spoken in that voice like expensive whiskey, sent warmth through my chest that I tried desperately to ignore. We were standing too close, the air between us charged with attraction I couldn't afford to acknowledge. "Sleep well," he said, stepping back before the moment could develop into something more complicated. "We'll speak soon." Across town, Elena Vasquez closed her laptop and reached for her phone. The FBI investigation files she'd obtained through carefully cultivated sources painted an interesting picture. Ruby Callahan wasn't just a random witness who'd stumbled into their world. She was actively being investigated as a potential informant. The surveillance photos were particularly damning. Ruby meeting with Detective Reynolds, accepting documents, engaged in what appeared to be serious conversation about cooperation. Whether Ruby was actually working with the FBI didn't matter. The appearance of betrayal would be enough to eliminate her as a threat. Elena smiled as she began composing emails to carefully selected recipients within the organization. Alessandro's weakness for the little librarian would finally prove useful. One way or another, Ruby Callahan would be removed from the equation, and Elena would be there to console Alessandro through his grief. In his own apartment, Victor Toretti stared at financial reports that confirmed his worst fears. Alessandro's leadership had made the organization more profitable than ever, more respected, more secure from law enforcement pressure, which meant Victor's own position would remain secondary indefinitely, unless something changed dramatically. The Ruby situation offered opportunity if handled correctly. Alessandro's obvious feelings for the woman represented vulnerability that could be exploited, a crisis that required decisive action, leadership that put family loyalty above personal attachment. Victor began making calls to allies who shared his frustration with Alessandro's cautious approach to business. Change was coming whether Alessandro wanted it or not. The boardroom in Alessandro's building commanded respect through sheer presence. Mahogany paneling that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, a conference table that could seat 20, and windows offering commanding views of Manhattan's financial district. 3.5 months had passed since that first terrifying encounter at the cafe, and I'd grown accustomed to these meetings where Alessandro conducted business with the careful precision of a symphony conductor. Today felt different from the moment I entered. The usual atmosphere of controlled efficiency had been replaced by something sharper, more dangerous. Victor stood near the windows, his posture radiating barely contained aggression, while Elena sat at the far end of the table with a manila folder spread before her like evidence in a trial. Alessandro's inner circle had assembled. 6 men whose names I'd learned to recognize, whose loyalty had been tested through years of shared secrets and mutual survival. They watched me enter with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion, as if my presence somehow disrupted the natural order of their world. "Ruby," Alessandro said, gesturing toward the chair beside his usual position, "thank you for joining us today." I settled into the designated seat, acutely aware that this felt more formal than our previous interactions. Alessandro's tone carried the same authority I'd grown to associate with safety, but underneath it lurked tension that made my chest tighten with familiar anxiety. "Before we proceed with other business," Elena began, her voice carrying across the room with lawyer-like precision, "there's a matter concerning Miss Callahan that requires immediate attention." She opened the manila folder, revealing what appeared to be surveillance photographs. Grainy images that seemed to show me in conversation with a blonde woman outside various Manhattan locations. My blood ran cold as I recognized Detective Reynolds in several of the shots. "These photographs were taken over the past 6 weeks," Elena continued, passing copies around the table. "They clearly show Miss Callahan meeting regularly with FBI Detective Sarah Reynolds, accepting documents, engaging in what appears to be detailed briefings about ongoing investigations. The accusation struck like a physical blow. Every eye in the room focused on me with expressions ranging from disappointment to barely controlled hostility. Alessandro's face remained carefully neutral, but something shifted in his posture that suggested he was preparing for conflict. "That's not what it looks like," I said quickly, my voice sounding weak against Elena's confident presentation. "Detective Reynolds has been harassing me, demanding information I don't have. I've never cooperated with her investigation, according to our sources within the federal building." Elena replied smoothly, "You've been listed as a potential cooperative witness in their ongoing investigation of this organization. Your financial records show payments that investigators consider suspicious, and they've been pressuring you to provide evidence in exchange for immunity." Victor moved away from the windows, his impatience finally boiling over. "Alessandro, this is exactly what I warned you about months ago. She's been playing both sides, taking our money while feeding information to the FBI. I haven't told them anything," I protested, looking directly at Alessandro. "I deleted the recording like I promised. I've kept our agreement completely." "Then explain these meetings," Victor demanded, holding up one of the photographs. "Explain why you're accepting documents from federal investigators if you're not cooperating with their case." The truth was complicated. Reynolds had been threatening me, demanding cooperation I'd refused to provide, pressuring me with evidence of my financial connections to Alessandro's organization. But explaining that would mean admitting I'd been keeping secrets, that law enforcement considered me vulnerable to pressure. "Detective Reynolds has been trying to force my cooperation," I said carefully. "She threatens me with prosecution if I don't help build a case against you. But I've refused every time." "Refused?" Elena's tone suggested polite disbelief. "Miss Callahan, we have evidence of regular meetings, document exchanges, detailed conversations about organizational structure and activities. That hardly suggests refusal." Alessandro remained silent, studying the photographs with an expression I couldn't interpret. Was he evaluating the evidence against me? Considering whether months of careful relationship building had been elaborate deception on my part? "Look at me, Alessandro," I said, abandoning any pretense of formality. "You know me. You've seen how I care for Emma, how I've tried to build a life worth living. Do you really believe I would betray someone who's shown me nothing but protection and kindness?" "Kindness?" Victor's laugh held cruel amusement. "Alessandro, she's manipulating you with exactly the kind of emotional appeal that's made you weak. This organization doesn't survive on kindness. It survives on strength, on decisive action against threats." "What kind of decisive action?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Victor's smile was sharp as winter wind, the kind that eliminates threats permanently before they can destroy everything we've built. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. These men were discussing my death with the same casual efficiency they might use to plan a business merger. I thought about Emma, about the scholarship money that would disappear with me, about dreams that would die simply because I'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. "You're talking about murdering an innocent woman based on photographs that prove nothing," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "I've honored our agreement completely. I've never betrayed any confidence, never provided information to law enforcement." "Your denials are worthless," Victor snapped, his frustration finally erupting into open aggression. "Alessandro, every day we waste debating this gives the FBI more time to build their case. She needs to disappear before she can testify." "I'm not going to testify about anything because I don't know anything worth testifying about," I protested. "The conversation I recorded was deleted months ago. I have no evidence, no documents, no information that could damage this organization." "Enough!" Victor slammed his hand on the conference table, his patience completely exhausted. "She's lying, Alessandro, and your feelings for her are blinding you to the obvious truth. This woman is going to destroy everything our father built." He moved around the table toward me, his intent clear in every line of his body. "Since you won't handle this properly, I will." "Victor, stand down." Alessandro's voice carried unmistakable warning. "No," Victor replied, reaching for my arm. "This ends now." "I said stand down," Alessandro repeated, rising from his chair. Instead of complying, Victor grabbed my wrist and yanked me to my feet. "She's been playing you for months, feeding information to federal investigators while pretending to be your loyal little librarian." "That's not true," I said, trying to pull away from his grip. "Shut up," Victor snarled, his face inches from mine. "You've caused nothing but problems since you stumbled into our world. You're a liability we can't afford, and everyone in this room knows it." When I tried to defend myself again, tried to explain that I'd been protecting Alessandro by refusing to cooperate with Detective Reynolds, Victor's hand connected with my cheek in a slap that sent me staggering backward. The sound echoed through the boardroom like a gunshot, followed by silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. touch her again and die!" Alessandro's voice exploded through the room with such raw fury that everyone froze. In 3 quick strides, he crossed the space between us and grabbed Victor by the throat, lifting him slightly off the ground with strength that seemed to come from pure rage. "She is under my protection," Alessandro continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "Anyone who forgets that will answer to me personally." The declaration sent shockwaves through the assembled men. This wasn't just about defending me. It was Alessandro publicly claiming me as his own, establishing my untouchable status within the organization's hierarchy. Victor clawed at Alessandro's grip, gasping for air, but Alessandro held him for several more seconds before releasing him with disgust. "Ruby belongs to me now," Alessandro announced to the room. "That means she's family, and family is protected above all else." Alessandro's penthouse had never felt more like a sanctuary than it did in the hours following Victor's public humiliation in the boardroom. The bruise on my cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, but the physical pain paled compared to the emotional whirlwind of what had just transpired. Alessandro had claimed me publicly, declared me family in front of his entire inner circle, and the implications of that declaration were still sinking in. "Let me look at that," Alessandro said softly, guiding me toward the master bathroom where natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated the damage Victor's hand had inflicted. His fingers traced the swollen skin with exquisite gentleness, and I caught my breath at the intimacy of his touch. "It's not that bad," I managed, though my voice came out more breathless than I'd intended. "It's bad enough," Alessandro replied, his jaw tightening with controlled anger. "Victor crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. He put his hands on you in violence, and that requires consequences." He retrieved a first aid kit from beneath the marble vanity, his movements efficient but tender as he applied ice wrapped in soft cloth to my bruised cheek. This close, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he was maintaining over emotions that ran much deeper than simple protective instinct. "Thank you," I whispered, "for defending me. For what?" His green eyes met mine in the bathroom mirror, and the intensity there made my pulse quicken. "For making me feel like I belong somewhere." Something shifted in Alessandro's expression, and suddenly the careful distance we'd maintained for months collapsed entirely. His hands moved from my cheek to frame my face, thumbs tracing patterns along my jaw as if memorizing every detail. "Ruby," he said, my name carrying weight that transformed it into something precious. "You need to understand what claiming you as family means in my world. It means you're mine to protect, mine to care for, mine to... yours," I finished softly, the word hanging between us like a bridge we were both afraid to cross. The kiss that followed was everything I'd imagined, and nothing I'd been prepared for. Alessandro's lips moved against mine with controlled passion, as if he was holding back years of want while simultaneously claiming everything I was willing to give. My hands found the lapels of his suit jacket, pulling him closer until there was no space left between us. "Are you sure?" he asked against my mouth, giving me one final opportunity to retreat before we crossed into territory that would change everything between us. Instead of answering with words, I kissed him again, pouring months of suppressed attraction and growing affection into the connection. Alessandro's response was immediate and overwhelming, his arms surrounding me, lifting me easily as he carried me toward the bedroom. The afternoon dissolved into sensation and discovery. Alessandro worshipped my body with the same careful attention he applied to everything else, learning what made me gasp, what made me arch against him, what transformed me from the cautious librarian into a woman who could match his intensity. When he finally claimed me completely, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never known existed. Afterward, we lay tangled together among Egyptian cotton sheets, my head pillowed on Alessandro's chest, while his fingers traced lazy patterns along my bare shoulder. The intimacy felt natural, right in ways that defied every logical argument about the dangers of our situation. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. "Now you're truly mine," Alessandro replied, his voice carrying satisfaction and possessiveness in equal measure. "Anyone who threatens you threatens me directly. Victor learned that lesson today. And Elena?" Alessandro's hand stilled against my skin. "What about Elena? She orchestrated this whole situation, didn't she?" those photographs, the timing of the accusation. It was all designed to create conflict between us. You're very perceptive, Alessandro said after a long pause. Elena has been part of this organization for 5 years. I trusted her judgment, relied on her legal expertise. The idea that she would manipulate evidence to eliminate you. Jealousy makes people do desperate things. Across the city, Elena Vasquez stared at the surveillance photographs scattered across her dining room table. The images showed Ruby entering Alessandro's building, but more importantly, they showed her never leaving. Hours had passed since the confrontation in the boardroom, hours during which Alessandro had undoubtedly been consoling his precious little librarian in the most intimate way possible. The sight of Victor's humiliation had been deeply satisfying. Finally, someone had stood up to Alessandro's iron control. But Victor's failure also meant Elena needed a new strategy, one that would eliminate Ruby permanently, while positioning Elena as Alessandro's inevitable choice for partnership. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Emergency meeting tonight. We need to discuss next steps." Elena smiled as she typed her response. Alessandro's weakness for Ruby would destroy him, but not before it served Elena's purposes. She began making calls to allies within the organization, men who'd grown tired of Alessandro's cautious leadership, who believed the family needed someone willing to make harder choices. Detective Sarah Reynolds studied the financial records spread across her desk at the FBI field office, searching for patterns that might finally give her the leverage she needed against Alessandro Toretti. 4 months of investigation had yielded circumstantial evidence and educated guesses, but nothing that would survive federal court. Then her phone rang with news that changed everything. "Detective Reynolds, this is Agent Chen from Surveillance. We have some interesting developments regarding the Callahan subject." "What kind of developments?" "She entered Toretti's residential building 3 hours ago and hasn't left. Our directional microphones picked up what sounds like intimate activity. If they're romantically involved, that gives us significant leverage." Reynolds felt her pulse quicken. A romantic relationship between Ruby and Alessandro represented the kind of personal vulnerability that could crack even the most disciplined criminal organization. Love made people stupid, made them prioritize emotion over survival instinct. "Maintain surveillance and document everything," Reynolds ordered. "I want photographs, audio recordings, anything that confirms the nature of their relationship. If Alessandro Toretti has fallen for our reluctant witness, we finally have the pressure point we need." Later that evening, while Alessandro slept beside me, I retrieved my phone from where it had fallen during our passionate afternoon. 23 missed calls from Detective Reynolds, along with increasingly urgent text messages demanding immediate contact. The final message made my blood run cold. "Ruby, we know about your relationship with Toretti. This changes everything. Contact me immediately or face the consequences." But it was the email that had arrived an hour ago that truly frightened me. The sender was anonymous, but the message was clear. "Alessandro's weakness for you will destroy everything he's built. Some of us won't allow that to happen." Attached were photographs of Elena meeting with Victor, both of them looking like conspirators planning revolution. There were also images of federal agents positioning surveillance equipment around Alessandro's building, and documents that appeared to show indictments being prepared. I was trapped in the eye of a hurricane, with enemies closing in from every direction. The afternoon's passion had been beautiful, transformative, everything I dreamed intimacy could be, but it had also painted an even larger target on both our backs. Alessandro stirred beside me, his arm tightening around my waist possessively even in sleep. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new difficult choices about loyalty and survival. But tonight, wrapped in the safety of his arms, I finally understood what it meant to belong to someone completely. The storm was coming, and love might not be enough to survive it. The anonymous email had arrived at 3 a.m, jolting me from restless sleep beside Alessandro. The sender's identity remained hidden, but the message burned into my consciousness. "Warehouse 47, Brooklyn Docks, tomorrow night. Alessandro will be walking into a trap orchestrated by people he trusts. If you care about him, you'll find a way to warn him without revealing your source." Attached were photographs that made my blood run cold. Victor meeting with men I didn't recognize, their faces hard with the kind of violence that left no survivors. Elena handing over documents to the same strangers, her expression coldly satisfied. Most damning of all, Detective Reynolds coordinating with federal agents around a warehouse complex, tactical gear suggesting they expected armed resistance. 4.5 months had passed since that first terrifying encounter at the cafe, and I'd learned to read the subtle signs of danger that permeated Alessandro's world. This felt different. More coordinated. More final. The kind of betrayal that ended with body bags rather than negotiations. Alessandro stirred beside me, his arm tightening around my waist possessively even in sleep. How could I explain receiving anonymous intelligence without revealing that someone within his organization was feeding information to outsiders? How could I convince him that his own brother and most trusted legal advisor were actively plotting his destruction? "You're awake," Alessandro murmured against my neck, his voice rough with sleep. "Bad dreams?" "Something like that," I replied, trying to keep the fear from my voice. "Alessandro, I need to tell you something important." He was instantly alert, sitting up and studying my face with those penetrating green eyes that seemed to see everything I tried to hide. "What's wrong?" "I received information about a planned ambush. Tomorrow night, warehouse district in Brooklyn. Multiple threats converging. Rivals, federal agents, people from within your own organization." Alessandro's expression hardened as he absorbed the implications. "What kind of information?" "From whom?" "Anonymous source. But the evidence is credible. Photographs showing Victor meeting with rival families. Elena providing intelligence to federal investigators. They're using a business deal as bait to lure you into a kill zone. Instead of panic or anger, Alessandro's face settled into the cold calculation I'd learned to associate with his most dangerous moods. "Show me everything." For the next hour, we examined every photograph, every document the anonymous sender had provided. Alessandro's questions were precise, tactical, focused on identifying specific locations and probable timelines. By sunrise, he'd constructed a complete picture of the conspiracy arrayed against him. "This is elegant planning," he admitted with something approaching admiration. "Victor feeds information about our waterfront expansion to the Castellano family, knowing they'll see it as encroachment on their territory. Elena provides federal investigators with meeting locations and timing. Both groups converge on the same target, each believing they're acting independently. And you walking into the middle of it," I said quietly. "Yes." Alessandro's smile was sharp as winter wind. "Except now we know about the trap, which transforms it from an ambush into an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind that eliminates multiple threats simultaneously, while demonstrating to anyone else considering betrayal exactly what happens to traitors." The plan Alessandro outlined was breathtakingly audacious. Use the warehouse meeting as intended, but arrive early with superior firepower and strategic positioning. Allow the federal agents and rival families to engage each other while his people controlled the perimeter. When the smoke cleared, Victor and Elena's betrayal would be exposed. The Castellano threat would be permanently neutralized, and Detective Reynolds' investigation would collapse under the weight of dead agents and burned evidence. "This is insane," I protested. "Too many variables. Too many ways for everything to go wrong." "The alternative is allowing enemies to dictate the terms of engagement," Alessandro replied. "Better to fight on ground of our choosing than wait for them to select the perfect moment for our destruction. I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not." His response was immediate and non-negotiable. "Ruby, this isn't a boardroom negotiation or a restaurant dinner. People are going to die tomorrow night, and I won't risk you being one of them. Someone needs to watch for federal surveillance, coordinate communications, provide early warning if additional threats appear. You need someone you trust completely in a support position." Alessandro studied me for a long moment, weighing protective instinct against tactical necessity. "If you're there and something goes wrong, if you're captured or killed, it will destroy me completely. Do you understand that? If you're killed because I stayed safely hidden while you faced enemies alone, it will destroy me just as completely." The warehouse district at night felt like entering a different world. Industrial shadows broken by pools of amber light. The distant sound of water lapping against concrete piers. And the kind of silence that suggested predators moving through darkness. Alessandro's people had positioned themselves with military precision, creating overlapping fields of fire while maintaining escape routes if the situation deteriorated beyond recovery. From my position in the communications vehicle parked 3 blocks away, I monitored radio frequencies and coordinate multiple surveillance feeds. The federal agents had arrived first, Detective Reynolds directing the positioning of tactical teams with obvious frustration at having to rely on questionable intelligence from sources she didn't fully trust. The Castellano soldiers appeared next, moving with the casual confidence of men who believed surprise was entirely on their side. They positioned themselves to catch Alessandro's people in crossfire, unaware that every movement was being tracked and countered. Victor arrived precisely on schedule, accompanied by Elena and 2 bodyguards, whose loyalty had apparently been purchased with promises of advancement under new leadership. They entered the warehouse complex, believing they were about to witness Alessandro's elimination and their own rise to power. That's when everything went wrong. The first shots came from an unexpected direction, Castellano soldiers opening fire on federal positions, after mistaking tactical movement for aggressive positioning. Detective Reynolds' voice exploded over intercepted radio channels, demanding to know why surveillance had turned into active combat. Through the chaos of muzzle flashes and conflicting radio chatter, I watched Alessandro move through the warehouse like a force of nature, eliminating threats with surgical precision, while his people maintained disciplined fire control. But Victor had positioned himself with clear sight lines to Alessandro's planned route, and Elena was directing him toward optimal shooting positions. "Alessandro, Victor has a clear shot from your 2 o'clock position," I warned through the encrypted communication channel. "Elena is spotting for him." "Confirmed," Alessandro responded. "Maintain your position and be ready for immediate extraction if this goes sideways." But I couldn't maintain position, couldn't stay safely hidden while watching Alessandro walk into his brother's crosshairs. Against every promise I'd made, against every tactical consideration that should have kept me in the communications vehicle, I found myself moving toward the warehouse complex. The gunshot that was meant for Alessandro took me in the shoulder instead, spinning me around and sending me crashing into a stack of shipping containers. Pain exploded through my system, but through the haze of shock and trauma, I saw Alessandro's expression transform into something absolutely terrifying. Victor's face went white as he realized his shot had hit the wrong target. "I didn't mean... Alessandro, I was aiming for... Touch her again and die!" The words echoed through the warehouse with lethal promise, and Alessandro's weapon spoke with final authority. Victor's body crumpled to the concrete, his betrayal ending exactly as it deserved. Elena tried to run, but Alessandro's people had already sealed every exit. By dawn, the threat from within had been permanently eliminated, and our enemies had destroyed each other exactly as planned. The private hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fresh flowers, but the sterile environment couldn't diminish the warmth of Alessandro's presence beside my bed. 5 months had passed since that first terrifying encounter at the cafe, and every day had led to this moment. Lying here with a bandaged shoulder, while the man I loved refused to leave my side even for meals. "The doctor says you can go home tomorrow," Alessandro said softly, his fingers intertwined with mine, in a grip that hadn't loosened since they'd wheeled me out of surgery. Full recovery expected within 6 weeks. "Home," I repeated, testing the word. My studio apartment felt like a lifetime ago, belonging to a different version of myself who'd believed safety meant hiding from the world. Where exactly is home now? Alessandro's smile held promises that made my heart race, despite the medication flowing through my IV line. "Wherever you want it to be," though I have some strong preferences about the answer to that question. The past week had brought resolution to threats that had shadowed us for months. Elena's attempt to flee the country had ended at JFK Airport, where Alessandro's people intercepted her with evidence of her betrayal, compiled into a file that sealed her fate. The organization's justice had been swift and absolute. Traitors didn't receive second chances in Alessandro's world. Detective Reynolds had fared better, though her career lay in ruins. With her key witness dead, her surveillance operation compromised, and her investigation built on evidence that had vanished along with Elena's cooperation, the FBI had transferred her to a field office in Montana, where organized crime consisted primarily of cattle rustling. "There's something I need to ask you," Alessandro said, reaching into his jacket pocket with the careful movements of someone retrieving something precious. Something I should have asked months ago, before bullets started flying and conspiracies nearly tore us apart. My breath caught as he withdrew a small velvet box, its contents hidden, but but its significance unmistakable. "Alessandro, Ruby Callahan," he began, opening the box to reveal a ring that took my breath away. A flawless diamond surrounded by emeralds that matched his eyes, set in platinum that caught the afternoon light streaming through the hospital windows. "You've seen the worst of my world and chosen to stay. You've risked your life to protect mine, shown more courage than soldiers I've known." Tears blurred my vision as the full weight of his words sank in. This wasn't just a proposal. It was an invitation into a life I'd never imagined possible. Acceptance into a family that would protect me with the same ruthless efficiency they used to eliminate enemies. "Will you marry me?" he asked simply. "Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice?" "Yes," I whispered, the word carrying months of suppressed hope and carefully guarded dreams. "Yes, absolutely. Yes." The ring slid onto my finger with perfect precision, as if it had been waiting for this moment as long as we had. Alessandro's kiss was gentle, mindful of my injuries, but it carried promises of passion and protection that made my pulse quicken with anticipation for our future together. 2 weeks later, I stood in the rose garden behind Alessandro's penthouse, surrounded by the inner circle of his organization and the handful of people who comprised my new family. The ceremony was intimate, elegant, everything a wedding should be when two people choose each other against impossible odds. Emma had flown in from Colombia, her medical school acceptance letter still clutched in her purse like a talisman. The anonymous scholarships that had made her education possible now had a face, and she'd embraced Alessandro with genuine gratitude rather than suspicion. "I never thought I'd see you this happy," she whispered during the reception, watching Alessandro accept congratulations from men whose loyalty had been tested in blood and fire. "He looks at you like you hung the stars. He saved my life in more ways than I can count," I replied, adjusting the family ring that now adorned my hand, a Toretti heirloom that marked me as matriarch in waiting. "And I think I saved his too." The vows we'd exchanged were traditional in words, but revolutionary in meaning. Alessandro had promised to cherish and protect me, but he'd also sworn to honor the strength that had brought us together, to never treat me as helpless, despite the dangerous world we inhabited. My promises had been equally significant: to stand beside him through whatever challenges our future might hold, to trust his judgment in matters of family business, and to help him build something better than what previous generations had created. As evening settled over Manhattan, Alessandro and I stood alone on the terrace overlooking Central Park. The city stretched endlessly in every direction, millions of lights representing lives and dreams and struggles we'd never fully understand. "Any regrets?" Alessandro asked, his arm around my waist as we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Only one," I said, leaning into his warmth. "I wish we could have found each other sooner. We found each other exactly when we were supposed to," he replied, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Everything that happened before was just preparing us for this moment." The future spread before us like an unwritten book, filled with possibilities that both thrilled and terrified me. There would be challenges: rival families who saw our happiness as weakness, law enforcement agencies that would never stop trying to build cases against us, the constant balancing act between the legitimate businesses Alessandro was expanding and the legacy enterprises that funded our lifestyle. But there would also be love, partnership, and the kind of security that came from belonging to someone who would literally kill to protect you. I thought about the woman I'd been 5 months ago, alone, struggling, hiding from a world that felt too dangerous to engage with fully. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, braver, capable of standing beside a man whose power could reshape entire neighborhoods. I'd found my place in Alessandro's world, and more importantly, I'd helped him find a version of himself that balanced strength with compassion. The ring on my finger caught the last rays of sunlight, emeralds and diamonds creating tiny rainbows that danced across the terrace stones. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, new threats to face together. Tonight, wrapped in the arms of the man who'd claimed me completely, I finally understood what it meant to be home.